Okay, yeah. Well, Proxy is a project that has been going on for about 2 years now, and the idea is to try to build to do identity construction online. And what it's built around is a software agent that we've been engineering, and the agent is supposed to be the embodiment of the data that it carries. Just as we're kind of the manifestation of the information that we carry that circulates through us. And so it's really playing with exploring issues of agents and human agency, or agency that's not human but is driven by software. And the idea is to really develop interesting information spaces that dynamically change and mutate over time as people use this agent system. Unfortunately, for people on your end, you're not going to really be able to see the agent application itself running. But what Natalie will be doing is pointing to a web page that has a Java applet loaded, which will give some sense of the information space, hopefully, and I'll be using the agent system on this end and doing things with it that hopefully will provide you some idea of what's going on that side as well. Is everything coming through okay so far? Okay. And Natalie, do you have a web browser running with what do you have showing there? So you already have it loaded. Okay. So let me just have you, Natalie, if you could, hang on one second. Can you connect as a guest? Okay. Now, Natalie, could you just follow me as I move into a new space here, and then I'll talk a little bit about what's going on in just a minute. I'm going to type Go Agency. Okay, now I'm going to type Go FAC, and that'll take us to the faculty subjects area. Okay, now I'm going to type Go COL. That'll take us into the collaboration area. And now Go FUS. Okay, and now I'm going to display a page to you on your end that will show you the registration process for the agent that I want to just talk about briefly. 1 second. Did that page load for you on your end? Okay. So if, for example, you were to go to this page, it would tell you a little bit about the project, and this is where you would register to get your own agent. And basically, what the first part of this does is just ask you for some simple information about yourself. But what I wanted to focus on is toward the end of that page in this agent customization section. What this does is it collects responses to questions that then get used to give the agent a sense of persona or personality. So you see 18 questions there. The first one, I have trouble perceiving others' emotions. And then if you click to make a selection, you have options from almost never to most of the time. The second question, I am uncomfortable with strangers. The third, I find socializing unpleasant. The fourth, I am unable to communicate my needs. The fifth, I have difficulty accepting support from others. The sixth, I am reluctant to work in groups. Those first 6 questions are actually getting people to respond to a single parameter that I have arbitrarily come up with, which links to alienation. So alienation is one of the behavioral attributes that gets attached to this agent that you're about to order on the basis of how you respond to those first 6 questions. The next 6 questions, I would destroy a friendship for promotion. I like to be in the limelight. I feel envious when a friend gets recognition. I resent being ignored. I would physically harm someone to get ahead. I would tell a lie if it serviced a higher goal. Those 6 questions are used to map to an ambition attribute. And the next 6, I would tell a lie. I am short-tempered and angry. I feel like crying. And again, all of these are answered with the same basic almost never to most of the time responses. I feel like crying. I feel tense. I have unstable moods and behavior. I have palpitations and/or accelerated heart rate. I have ringing in my ears. Those last 6 questions are used to map to a behavioral parameter called anxiety, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. So I won't take the time right now to actually fill this out, partly since I've already done it. But what you would do then is respond to those, hit submit, and it generates a database and sends some email off to the administrator of the system and allows you then to download the agent software. Now, when you get the agent software, you have a variety of different kind of interfaces to it. So let's see. Natalie, I believe if you just go to your options menu or file menu and do help, it will load that first page that you are at that says Java clients, or I'm sorry, proxy clients. Oh, you're looking at a second page that had loaded on top of it? So you still have the original clients page. The page of help that you loaded the Java applet from originally. That one is still up for you? Okay. Let me load that one here. Okay, sorry for the delay. So what that page does is then, part of the issue was thinking, okay, you could go to a page and download an agent, but then you have to have some sort of context within which you use that agent system. And so what I've been working on is using, some of you may be familiar with MUDs or MOOs, using that as a text-based interface that provides people using the agent with a sense of context for the different kinds of information spaces that would develop over time. So what Natalie has running there with the applet is a kind of thin client version of proxy that would allow people to have some kind of sense of the space, even if they're not directly using the agent system like I am here. So what you saw Natalie and me originally do as we were traveling through the space was essentially beginning to get a sense of the kind of environment that I've just initially been constructing for the agent. So Natalie, if you type home, H-O-M-E, good. So this is the starting point called Root Proxy Portal. And again, it's just a text-based virtual environment that gives you some sense of the space that you occupy. But one of the neat things about this particular environment is that it's extensible, meaning that if people have the privilege granted by the administrator of the system, they can extend it and build their own objects. Everything that you see here kind of exists as an object in the space. So you can read a description of it. In this case, this is not a beginning, but a place of potential exit and entry. You are there, nowhere, or now here, relocated as subject to object relations, blah, blah, blah. That just is the initial description of this particular part of the space. Then you see a line below that saying items, and in this case you have two items, news and a utility cube. And if you type news, for instance, what it does is it just shows you recent information that you could read to get a sense of what's happening if you want. You don't need to do that right now. If you type look, it again prints out the same description of the space that you started with. If you wanted to type look utility, then what it does is it shows you everything that happens to be inside that object called a utility cube. And we won't really spend any time going through this, but what it does is have lots of different items in it that allow you to do different kinds of things in the environment, record conversations, all sorts of stuff like that. And then you have the same kind of communication, real-time communication stuff that you have with the hotline client, for instance. So if you type a single quote like Natalie just did, saying hello, I can say hello back, and we can engage in a kind of real-time conversation. But one of the things that I wanted to do to have some fun kind of playing around and to also open it up to new ways of communicating with different audiences was to build in some translation services. So if you look, and this should work even with the particular version of the client that Natalie has running there. So if you look, one of the menu options is translation. And for instance, if I wanted to have everything that I type in real time translated to German, I could select the English to German option. And if Natalie wanted to be typing in German, she could select the translation from German to English option, and then we could type something to each other in our native language and have it translated on the fly. And I don't know how many of you might be familiar with the German or the translation services, but there's an art to figuring out how to make them actually functional, just as there's an art to using them in their kind of unpredictable and functionless ways as well. So I have no idea if what I said actually makes any sense to you on that end in its translation, but it's something that's actually pretty interesting to play around with. So in the interest of having this be sensical, I'm going to go ahead and turn it back to English and just continue in that way. But the other thing, so again, you have these simple ways to communicate. Then you can navigate the space as we were a little bit earlier by typing go to whatever particular items show up in the paths area. So if I type go age, then it's going to take me into agency, which is another space, and Natalie has just arrived, and it kind of describes that for us. And then if I type go FAC, it takes me back into faculty subjects. And if I type go COL, again, back to collaboration. And if you're spending any time reading these descriptions, you might begin to get a sense of where my head's been at lately with regard to some of these issues. And then I'm going to go FUS to Fusion. So now here in Fusion, you can see some items: mediation, conduit, referencer. What those three items are actually bots, little conversational bots that will respond to people's text. So I can go ahead and activate these bots, and what they do is they start spitting stuff out or engaging in conversation with each other. And the thing about these that's neat is you can also set the translation for the bots so that a lot of what they start saying comes back in any of the languages that are available. So I believe Conduit might currently be set to French. And so mediation and Conduit are starting to trigger conversations with each other that occasionally lead to interesting kinds of output that you're able to actually input if you have the access in the system. So for instance, anybody can very simply create one of these bots for themselves once they're logged into the environment and begin to input keyword responses to it and have it available for people to experience when they come into a particular space. So again, Moo and Mud is something that people have been developing for years, which really never got used very much in artistic or creative kinds of application. And my interest was not so much in just playing around with Moo in some of the ways that have been built into it, but extending it so that it could provide an interface to the agent system that we've been working on here. So the idea is, instead of requiring people to know how to program in Moo and create these objects and create these spaces themselves, what they can do is, if they're using the agent system, have the agent do it for them. So what I'm going to do now is spend a few minutes just going through some of what the agent's capable of doing for people here, and I think you might be seeing a video stream that would capture some of this. But the client that I'm running has a menu option on it called, oh, I know what I could do. Natalie, it might be a little easier for some of the people there if you pull up a particular page. Hang on one second. I'll do this for you. Just give me about 1 minute here. Thanks, Robert. Okay, Natalie, if you type look, you should see an item called TUT. And I'm going to display that to you. And it should load up a page that says tutorial. Do you see that? Okay, good. So that page, Natalie, if you can just try to follow along a little as I talk about the different functions the agent has, it should help a little for the audience there. So the first thing you see when you load the agent system is a dialog window that welcomes you, where you give your name and password to log in. And if you scroll down a little from that, you see a window that looks very similar to a Telnet client, which I did because partly I'm interested in a fairly minimal interface, and partly because it's just much more efficient this way, and provides us to run the agent system in connection to the MOO that is interfaced with it. If you scroll down a little bit more, you see the options menu, and there you have a couple of abilities that I'll talk about briefly. The first is Auto Web Map, and if you select that, and I believe that one's actually available to Natalie in her client as well, it will update the web page for you automatically as you start to move through the space. So it just provides you another interface to navigate this information environment. The Auto VRML map, VRML is an acronym for Virtual Reality Modeling Language, for those that might not be familiar with it. It's a very efficient text-based way to describe three-dimensional environments, objects with animation attached to them. If that one is select, any of the objects in this space can have a VRML object associated with them, so it provides you with a 3D view of the space or the object. So I'm going to go ahead and turn that on here and just type "look me" for the audience here, and what that should do is load up a viewer that will show whatever object you've attached to yourself as a VRML object. I'm going to turn that off, and if you 1 second, sorry. It tells me actually that Natalie is trying to activate the VRML map as well. I don't know if your browser is set to handle it. Okay, I'm going back to the tutorial page and continuing down a little bit to the next menu, and that's a snapshot of the screen that shows you the translation options. And again, that simply allows you to translate from English to one of 5 languages: French, Italian, Portuguese, Spanish, or German, or from French to English, Spanish to English, or German to English. And the way we're doing this is hacking into freely available translation services on the net and having it send back stuff directly to our client. So what those options are and how well they work is dependent upon how good these services become and how long we can do it before they find out and stop us from doing it. The next menu is the agent menu. And what this one shows is how you can begin to do a few things with the agent. The first option, Link To, allows you to attach data to your agent that will be partly used to represent you online. And this, what you attach to yourself and how it gets used in the context of the space, is influenced by the attributes, alienation, ambition, anxiety, that you registered with earlier. So if you execute the Link To menu, and you won't be able to see that there, what it does is brings up a dialog that allows you to reference any object that exists on the net remotely. But what we did, which is, I think, really interesting, is we allowed it to link to any object or any piece of data that also lives on your personal computer. So anybody that has a connection to the net can, using the agent system, have the power of being a server of information as well. So the agents kind of migrate and move through the network and actually have access to any information from people's local drives. So you no longer have to take your data and upload it to some commercial service provider who would then set it up for you or give you a limited amount of space in some kind of public web directory. But you can use your own personal computer as a server of your information. So hopefully this will allow artists and other people who collaborate in building out this space to link to all kinds of resources that other people will have access to that they would not normally have access to using traditional means. The other thing that you can do when you link to data is describe it. So it allows you to provide more personal summary information about the data that you carry. And then the agents running behind the scenes are aware of the descriptions that people have given to all of the information that they embody. And this allows agents to notify other agents of people who may have data or information that's of interest to them. So the idea is using this allows you to have a much more controlled and relevant information space for people who are building a certain sense of community out of the data or the information that their agents carry. If you scroll down the tutorial page, you see some of the different dialog boxes that I've just talked about. The Link To dialog box, the Describe dialog box. You also have the ability to search, of course, and what that does, and I'll be running it here, but you can just I don't know if you're seeing any of this, but I'll talk about it. You can input a keyword, select a particular agent that you want to search, and the agent then goes through and looks for any other agents that are currently connected to the space that would have that particular keyword associated with some of the data that they carry, and then bring back a list of any of those results. And then you can view those results using a number of different what I call visualizers or visualization tools. So there's different ways that you can create a visual interface to the agent system, and what I'll show here in a moment is just a very simple first kind of prototype of a visualizer. But moving down the tutorial page, you can see the next dialog box, which is the monitor dialog, and that's a way to allow your agent to monitor public sites or other agents that are in the system, and it notifies you as soon as stuff changes or as things become available to you. Now, the next dialog, which is display ASCII, allows you to take whatever data your agent has and share it with people who may not necessarily have the agent system running, like Natalie. So, for instance, if I try to export some of the data that my agent has, I select a place to export it to, and then whatever data I want to have exported, hit OK. And hopefully on your end, in a second, you'll see something that tells you that an agent has just written some data to a particular location in this environment. So this is the way that the agent is used to automatically build on to this text-based virtual environment and prevents people from having to code all this stuff themselves. So if Natalie types the @go space number 185, then she'll join me here in this space that the agent just created, and I see she's arrived. So here what you see is a space called snapshot, which is basically where the agent writes the data that it holds. And there's an item called IP bot, and that's one of these little conversational bots that gets created for you, which has knowledge about all the data that your agent carries. And then you have a pathway to somewhere called the gateway. So if you type GATE, gate, you see a text-based version of it. You could think of it as a text-based visualizer of the data that the agent, some of the data that the agent carries. And if you want to explore that data, you can type the number of the link, so 1, 2, 3, or 4 in this case, because there are 4 different links that you could select. I'll type link number 1. And
Mommy, how do you turn
then this
on?
is now showing you, I see Natalie's just come, this is showing you a description of the space that is based on whatever information the person using the agent system put in to describe that particular piece of data. And that camera was on me. So this is what they're seeing. Hey, Tim, can you realign that camera? Angie just moved.
Sorry. I thought you weren't.
And then we can also display that data. So what I just did is typed display here, and that simply is a link to the UC Santa Barbara campus, which should have loaded for Natalie as well. Did you see it? Okay, good.
It's not working.
So going back to the tutorial, and I'm almost done here. Scrolling down towards the bottom, you see the last two screens, which show you an example of a very simple visual interface that can be done from within the Java application. So unfortunately you won't really see that here, but what this does is provide a 3D representation of the text data. So right now the way I've done it is to just simply use the URLs and some very simple text as the nodes representing the data that the agent carries. But you could imagine any other kind of things being used to visualize the data, you know, simple 3D objects or whatever kind of interface people might want to provide, they can provide here. And the attributes that were defined for the agent early on, again, ambition, alienation, and anxiety, get really used here in the visualizer because the kind of sound that you hear in relation to your information and what other agents who are requesting your information and stuff like that are doing, and the motion behavior of the data are all linked to those particular attributes. So sound and motion become a way to try to embody the agents in ways that are unique to, again, the psychological attributes that people provided for it. And part of the whole idea with the project is not to think of agents so much as, again, sort of servants working for people, but to build in a kind of evolutionary behavior and chaotic principles that allow the agents to evolve in ways that are a little bit out of control of any of the people that are actually using them. And that, to me, is really where it starts to become a lot of fun. But that's basically an overview of this system, which, again, is in a very early prototype. And, you know, what we're now in a position to begin doing, which is very exciting, is to start using it creatively. Because for the last couple years, I've really been hung up with more technical kinds of implementation issues that have been done with a mind toward how they would be put to use creatively. But it's only just recently that we're beginning to really be able to experiment more creatively with it. So I'll stop there and would be happy to answer any questions that any of you might have. You mean? Right. No, not at this point. The idea, though, is that this will be offered as an open source project, so anybody will have access to it who wants, and that it's being designed in a modular way so that hopefully the core that we provide will be easily extensible for people who have the programming skills to build onto it. We'll be documenting it. The agents themselves are actually fairly easy to write, and so I'm hoping, for example, to work with an undergraduate class in computer science where part of the project would be to have students write new agents that would interface to our system. A lot of the message passing and things that we're doing like that involve using XML, the extensible markup language, which is human readable and fairly easy to manipulate. So hopefully it will be fairly easy for people to use our system, and the degree to which we or other people might build in hooks that would allow folks to interface to other agent systems is very exciting. It's just not something we've currently done.
Okay, thanks. That sounds very exciting. I keep watching.
Great.
Brother, would you be interested in taking some guest students from our institution?
Taking, how do you mean taking?
Well, as a semester for an exchange.
Oh yeah, that would be wonderful. And also just
Because we have
the possibility.
people here who are interested.
Great, yeah. Also the possibility of remote collaboration with anybody who's interested in working with actually building the system or learning more about it. I'm very open to. So you've got my email contact, and I would love to hear from people who are interested in collaborating.
One of the students here has a brother who's working in a similar area. I'll just get him to describe that to you.
Yeah, great.
Well, that's me again, Will. Yeah, probably have to describe because I don't know very much about what my brother does there. He's working at the University of Stuttgart, and it's just about that HTML stuff, I think. He's actually built something that he would call a visualizer. I think I haven't got access to that in early beta version too, but I think I'll get you to contact her.
Great, yeah. Wonderful.
Yeah, okay.
For any more questions?
This is the only project which is going on?
I'm sorry?
In your institution, are there other projects similar to this maybe?
Not so similar. I have a joint appointment in information and computer science, and there is a working group in that department that's focused on agents. But the way they approach it is very different. It's usually a much more isolated, specialized kind of function that they're trying to build. And working with artists and more creatively, it just involves a very different process of trying to piece together existing stuff in interesting ways, breaking lots of rules, doing sloppy code, trying to open it up to communities of people who would not otherwise have access to it, who aren't programmers, who are artists, musicians, whoever. It just involves a very different process, I think.
What about the visualization of the agents? What possibilities are there, do you think, for this in the future?
Well, I think there's tremendous possibilities. Again, all I've shown is a very simple first step. And just like the agents themselves, where the idea is to relatively simply be able to write new agent types to hook into the system, we'd like other people to be able to write new visualizers to visualize the system. And in fact, one of Victoria's projects, I'm sure many of you are familiar with, is very much about building new visualizers, which would be, I think, really incredible ways to look at the data that people using this system, how that could be used to represent them. So principles of tensegrity that come out of the work of Buckminster Fuller and have to do with stable structures within physical environments being mapped to network environments and network information topologies as a visualization tool for this agent system could be really pretty amazing. But again, this is something that we're just at the very beginning of exploring.
Does anyone else have any questions? It's very interesting from what I think of him.
Do you think it would be possible to control the agent completely with only with speaking? So that the user is just talking with it and getting answers?
That would be wonderful. I've been looking at some of the new media foundation classes, or just the media tools that the Java programming language provides, which do allow for things like text-to-speech synthesis and for voice control over the environment, so that it's perfectly feasible. In fact, it wouldn't be too hard for someone who knows what they're doing to write the code that would allow you to control this environment through voice, and that would be a really wonderful interface. And to have the information, much of which is text-based, read back to you using text-to-speech synthesis. So it would be, I think, a great application. But it's just, we've been very hung up doing what you've seen here, and a lot of those more creative applications will hopefully be in the not too distant future, but we haven't got to them yet.
So, anyone more questions from here? No, thank you very much, Robert.
Thank you.
Interesting presentation.
Thank you. Victoria's saying that, Jill, she would like to introduce you to someone. Okay. Thanks, everyone.
I'll stand up.